rising accommodation costs, endless queues, price gouging, not to mention the resentment felt by locals against gentrification and overcrowding. These are some of the problems that make people think twice about booking a trip to Madrid or to Kyoto, which is a city I've just visited recently on assignment for Lonely Planet. I'm your host, my name's Felicity Hughes, and I work as a travel journalist and tour guide in the city of Madrid. And my recent visit on assignment to Kyoto in Japan made me think about the challenges of overtourism, because Kyoto is a city that is dealing with exactly the same problem almost. Because in 2024, let me just look at my figures, the number of visitors to Kyoto reached 10 million. And in Madrid, we're just slightly ahead of that at 11 million. So I thought, what can I gain from this? And yeah, I asked the question, is it still worth visiting Madrid in 2025? And I'm going to say yes, it is worth visiting Madrid, but on the proviso that you do some planning ahead and you take a few little measures to show respect for the people who are living in a place that is suffering a little bit under the strain of overtourism. In this episode, I'll cover not only the places and times to avoid, but I'll also give you tips on new places that you might want to go to and how to get the best out of a visit to Madrid. And even if you're thinking of going to Kyoto in Japan as well, you might learn a thing or two. What I wanted to do though was start out with the bad, the overcrowding. And in Madrid, as I said, I work as a tour guide, but I do my tours as early as possible because the Calle Mayor, which leads between Sol and the Royal Palace, which are two of the big destinations in Madrid, is absolutely chock-a-block and extremely unpleasant to walk down pretty much any time of the day or week. And we locals, we just avoid it. We find other ways to get around the city and avoid Calle Mayor like the plague. And when I was in Kyoto, of course, I had to cover the places that were suffering from over-tourism. And one of the main parts is around Kiyomizu Temple, which is this gorgeous temple up on stilts in the mountains overlooking in the Higashiyama area, overlooking the city and lots of beautiful temples spilling down from it. Very steep hills called Ninenzaka and Sannenzaka that are completely overrun with tourists, and everyone was being quite rude, I would say, trying to get their perfect shot. And I was asked to step aside. Uh, it was kind of an unpleasant atmosphere to be in. And one of the things that really struck me too was that there used to be a lot of antique shops down Ninenzaka and Sannenzaka, and that's all gone. It's all shops selling like tourist hat. So it's lost a lot of its authenticity, even though it still is a really, really beautiful area. And exactly the same holds true for the Calle Mayor area. There's no authenticity hardly at all to the shops down there. There's just so much, kind of viscose flamenco dresses on sale and magnets and all this sort of rubbish that ends up in landfill anyway. And the other thing was a market. Sorry, it was lovely tour guide. I met up with her because I used to live in Japan, and we worked out it must have been about 15 years ago that I met her in Kyoto, when Kyoto was still only a destination for Japanese people. And we agreed to meet up. Wonderful to see. A shout out to her, by the way. Her name is Akie Watanabe. So if you're ever in Kyoto, please hire her because she's marvelous. And she took me around what's called Nishiki Market, which is the central food market in Kyoto. And we got there really, really early, but it was already starting to fill up. And she was kind of saying that like part of it was still authentic, part of it not so much, because people were sort of selling food that's possibly not really from the Kyoto region. And it really reminded me of San Miguel Market, which in fact she had visited the year before. She'd been as a tourist to Madrid. Of course, it goes both ways. People who live in these cities, you know, they go to over-touristy places too, so they can't be too mad. And yeah, I was like, I wish you'd thought of me and given me a ring, because San Miguel Market I covered in a recent episode on overrated and underrated places in Madrid. And San Miguel Market used to be wonderful. It was the start of a trend of local markets being revitalized with little pop-up shops and, you know, tiny restaurants, and you eat on a stall or whatever. But it's just become a victim of its own success. And I took photos there for the piece, and it was so unpleasant just being through those crowds. But the good thing about Madrid, which has the edge on Kyoto, is that this trend spread to other indoor markets. Indeed, we have more indoor markets than Kyoto. And therefore, you can go to all these other lovely markets like Mercado de San Fernando in Lavapiés, to name but one. I was just there the other day and had tacos in a Mexican place, and it was really lovely. Like locals go there. It's touristy, but not too touristy. It's really nice. So let's get to the really thorny topic, which is all this overcrowding, overtourism leads to resentment from locals. And I'd say that the number one issue with that is one that I just covered a few episodes back about why you shouldn't rent. Well, you know the answer, Airbnb. It's a global problem. Airbnb has been driving up rents in lots of places where big kind of vulture funds see buying up blocks of flats as an investment, and they rent them out to tourists. The buildings empty out, there's very little local culture, and the rents go sky high. So the best thing to do is to rent in a hotel. And here is one of the interesting things I saw about comparing Kyoto and Madrid with this problem. So even though they're having similar numbers of numbers of tourists coming in, Kyoto's population is a lot smaller than Madrid's. It's 1.6 million. Madrid is 3.3 million, and even larger in the metropolitan area. And the metropolitan area is key because Kyoto is bounded by mountains. It's one of the things that makes it such a beautiful destination. And this is very similar to Barcelona, which is why I feel like anti-tourist feeling in Barcelona is stronger than in Madrid. Barcelona is surrounded on one side by mountains and on the other side by sea, which essentially means that the city can't expand. Neither can Kyoto expand. So then you have a housing problem. And that means that the amount of holiday lets in the city is limited. Whereas in Madrid, you can start looking further out, because of course, prices have gone up with all this over-tourism. So in the case of Kyoto, locals are even now avoiding the area. And one of the reasons is the hotel prices have skyrocketed. Hotel prices have skyrocketed in Madrid too, but you can stay out in areas like Tetuan or Usera, for example, where I live, and you won't find the hotels as expensive. And another thing that we've got the edge on with Kyoto, which it was just dreadful when I went there, because they have a terrible transport infrastructure. Part of the problem is that it's full of centuries-old temples, so building underneath those is, you know, you're going to make the ground unstable. There's hardly any metro lines, train lines. Everyone's relying on buses, which are really overburdened. And, you know, traffic gets really bad. I had to make my way around by bike everywhere. But Madrid is great because you can live quite far out or stay quite far out. And you'll just, as long as you make your commute about 30 minutes max, you'll be really happy. You'll be seeing all the places you want to see, and you really won't feel like you've missed out. And I actually feel like that's better in many ways to stay about 30 minutes commute out, because if you stay in the city centre, you're likely to find that it's very, very noisy at night. And if you're really hell-bent on staying in the city centre, do that, but ask for a room that looks into a patio interior, which is the interior patio space. It's like a shaft in the middle of the building. And then you don't get the noise from the street. So that's my top tip for booking accommodation in Madrid. The other thing you can do to foster a lot of goodwill is learn a little bit of Spanish. And it really does help a huge amount. Now, I'm like super blessed because when I went to Japan, I know how to speak Japanese and I know how to speak Spanish as well. And people love it. Even if you can communicate just a tiny bit in their language, it shows respect and interest in the place that you're going to. But I'm sure you will do that. But yeah, and everybody knows hola, gracias, una cerveza, por favor, which actually brings me to the next topic, which is manners. Now, the una cerveza, por favor is a beer, please. But when you are drinking in Spain, please just keep it under control. This is probably the #1 complaint I get from Spaniards about British people, particularly. I don't think Americans are quite so bad. But especially around like a football match or a concert or something, people can get into really high spirits and they're so pleased to see that the prices are so low that they go out and they splurge. And you know, you're in a holiday mode, you want to get drunk. But Spaniards enjoy drinking, but they enjoy drinking slowly and sedately with food, with your tapa, which is what that's for. And they're pretty horrified if you get wasted. There's been huge scandals in the past. This is more of an issue on the costas, so on seaside resorts, where there's this phenomenon of what's called balconing, and it's generally young lads getting really, really drunk, jumping off balconies into swimming pools, missing and dying. I mean, it's tragic, but it's the most ridiculous way to die. And really, that sort of feeds into this whole impression of, you know, the tourists not being able to hold their alcohol and drinking too quickly. And, you know, it's not respectful to go out and be really, really drunk on the streets in Madrid. You can be jolly, you can sing, you can dance, but yeah, no aggression, no silly stunts, you know, but behave yourself. Funnily enough, that's the one thing that Japanese people do tolerate. You can get totally, really, really drunk in Japan. People don't tend to get violent or anything, but the drinking to excess is definitely one thing they don't look down on. They have very high standards about hygiene. So people kept complaining to me about onsens and saying that a lot of foreigners didn't know, you know, that they needed to bathe before they get into the pool. So you have a little shower unit and you bathe and whatever. Spaniards not quite so uptight about things like that, but there is one little exception which you may not know about, and that's that you should never put your bag on the floor in a bar. It's considered really filthy. It's also for security because there might be pickpockets everywhere. In fact, Spanish people are really good at alerting tourists to that problem. They will tell you not to put your bag behind your chair, for example. Put it on your lap, or buy this dinky little device that they sell in Alehop, which is a little hook that you can hook onto your table and then hook your bag underneath. And it's a really clever little thing. I bought a bunch of them for friends and family and they really enjoyed them. But yeah, don't put your bag on the floor, whatever you do. Another small piece of etiquette that you might not know about is never take your top off in public unless you're in the park. And this applies so women, if you're jogging, for example, jogging in just your sports bra, that's acceptable along the Manzanares River or in a park, but you can't jog through town in a sports bra. Equally, men, don't take your tops off in the street ever. And if it's a little bit of more of a formal garden, say the botanical gardens in Madrid, don't do that either, because my husband, a Spaniard, was actually told off for taking his top off on a hot day in the botanical gardens. But I would say Retiro is probably fine. It's more like, do you feel like you're on the beach? Do you feel like you're in a more casual space? Then that's okay. But in any other circumstances, keep it on. And my last one about manners is queuing. So people often think that Spanish don't queue, and this leads to a lot of confusion, and Spaniards get quite irate because they think they're giving the impression that there is no queue when in fact there is a queue, and they just have another system. So when you arrive at a market stall, you say to everybody waiting, ¿Quién es el último? And that's you asking who is the last person in the queue, and someone will put their hand up and you'll keep an eye on that person, because when it comes their turn to be served, you know it's your turn to be served. So it's quite a clever little thing that means nobody has to stand in line. Of course, paper numbers are introduced in some places, but that's the general rule in a marketplace. So remember that phrase, ¿Quién es el último? My next point is if you want to plan a good holiday, don't come in high season. And I was absolutely gobsmacked to realize that high season in Madrid is in August. And in some ways, actually, it's quite convenient to come in high season because a lot of Spaniards are out of town. You'll find the city relatively quiet in terms of Spaniards because that's when they go to the beach on holiday. You'll find it full of tourists, lots and lots of bars and restaurants shut, so that's kind of inconvenient. And the heat is appalling. It's really, really difficult. I was actually visiting Kyoto in summer, in June, and the heat suddenly went up really quickly. And that was equally difficult. But I would say, comparing the two, if you absolutely have to go in summer, because I know a lot of people only have summer because of kids' holidays or whatever, then do go in summer, but maybe choose Madrid over Kyoto. I don't know if you have that dilemma, but there's two reasons for this. The heat in Japan is humid, so it's about 80 degrees. The temperatures tend to be lower, but it feels hotter. And I was sweating so much there. I've never sweated so badly in my life. And in Madrid, we have quite the opposite thing. It's a dry heat, higher temperatures, but cooler in the morning, so you can go around and do things. And this is another crucial reason why Madrid's better, because in the afternoons you can go to air-conditioned spaces, and Madrid is a lot better for museums and galleries. So most of Kyoto is that you're seeing temples and whatever, and you're just sweating in the heat so badly. And of course, churches in Madrid are nice and cool because they're made out of stone, whereas wooden temples are not so cool in the summertime. So yeah, you can come in summertime. I don't really recommend it, but I do have another episode on how to survive summer in Madrid if you are planning on coming in summertime. Has its pluses or minuses, but absolutely do not go to Japan in summertime. Unless you've got lots of indoor activities planned, because it's sweltering and it doesn't even cool down that much at night. Now we come to the key bit, perhaps you've all been waiting for, is where you should visit. And I'm going to use a time-worn phrase, off the beaten track. Well, I don't think off the beaten track is ever possible these days. But what you want to be aiming for is off the beaten to death track. So that's, as I was talking before, Calle Mayor, places like that. And that's one of the reasons why I wrote my book, Quiet Madrid, which is all the hidden little spaces within the city. So it's not only all the cinemas and art galleries that you can go to, or secret gardens or whatever, but I've got a bunch of little walks that you can take through central Madrid where you can discover this like little hidden corners of the area. And of course, I was delighted to see that in Kyoto, the same holds true. Luckily, Kyoto's attractions are a lot more spaced out over a larger area because the imperial court kept moving around all the time, which isn't the same in Madrid. Of course, the royal family stayed in the same place in the royal palace for centuries. But yeah, I found this wonderful area in Kyoto along the Kamogawa River, which is fantastic for cycling and nature and everything. And it forks just to the north near the Imperial Palace Gardens. And there's the most authentic, wonderful ramen shops there. And yeah, the Imperial Palace Gardens has got a lovely little tea house that's only open a few days a week. And I went in there and it overlooks a lake. It was the most wonderful, tranquil spot. There's lots and lots to do and see in the city. Like in Madrid, there's lots to do and see. It's places that people miss because they're looking for the big attractions. And as I said, the big attractions sometimes, if you don't like crowds, they're more bother than they're worth. For example, the Prado, you can only really enjoy very, very first thing in the morning. So you need to plan ahead because if you get there first thing in the morning, you'll go straight into a queue. But instead, you know, in my overrated and underrated episode, I talk about how many people miss out the Thyssen Buonamizza, or they go on the free day. But if you pay to go in on a day when it's not free, you'll find the crowds really down, lots of space to enjoy it. Yeah, it's just really good. So yeah, my area, sorry, that's sort of similar to this area of Kyoto, I called Midstream Madrid, and I did a little video about it that you can find on YouTube. And you go from the Plaza Mayor and I take you down all these little side streets, and it goes down into a dip of land, which is possibly why not many people go there, because it's a little bit awkward to get to. But then you discover you wind up in this lovely secret garden at the bottom of the Plaza de la Paja. And it's a brilliant place to go to. Again, I'm kind of talking a little bit about my book, Quiet Madrid, but if you don't want to shell out for that, you can join my mailing list and you can get a free copy of Madrid Beyond the Guidebook, which I wrote after I wrote the Lonely Planet Guide to Madrid. And it's got all the sort of places that we had to leave off because they weren't geographically within the area that we covered, but I actually thought were really, really worth visiting. So that's sort of places within the city itself. But then, of course, you've got the outskirts, which are always worth exploring. And that was really brought home to me when I was in Kyoto, because I went to this wonderful place called Byodo Inn in Uji, which is beautiful, luscious tea country just outside of Kyoto. Really short train journey out. And the place was well visited by Japanese people who know it's really, really famous because it has these beautiful old phoenixes, sculptures of phoenixes atop what's called the Phoenix Hall. And the whole building is reflected in a pool. And in fact, two big kind of iconic images, the whole temple itself is on a coin, and the phoenixes appear on the 10,000 yen Japanese note. So a well-known place for Japanese, but not so much for Western tourists. And you know, Japanese people are nice and quiet. So of course it felt really quiet and tranquil, even though there was quite a few people there. And the place I recommend in Madrid, which is in that book I was just telling you about, Madrid Beyond the Guidebook, is the Cathedral of Justo Gallego. And this is out in a random suburb in the middle of nowhere in Madrid. You just take a bus out and you find this incredible cathedral that was built by one man, a former monk, who dedicated his life to building a cathedral out of scrap, and he had no knowledge of architecture whatsoever. And he just built this fantastic space. You have to see pictures of it to really appreciate it. So I'm going to try and weave in some photography that my husband took when we went out there. But yeah, go and visit that place. If you like the Sagrada Familia, the extravagance of that building, you will love, love, love the Cathedral of Justa Gallego. And then we get to little towns further out, so like day trips. So in Kyoto, I discovered the merchant town of Omihachiman. And it really reminded me of these old Akira Kurosawa samurai films, you know, which are a little bit like westerns. He loved John Ford, by the way, so he loved this kind of scene of the Ronin, the masterless samurai, arriving in a street where, you know, one-horse town, there's a whole street of sort of merchant buildings along there, and there's a sake bar or whatever, and trouble starts up. And Omi Hajiman looked just like this. You can go in and see the merchant houses. It was really fantastic. Lovely old buildings left from like the Edo period. And beautiful moat, you can ride in a boat there. And I suppose, like, when I'm thinking about an equivalent in Madrid, I thought of Cuenca, which is a journey not many people do because the high-speed train to Cuenca actually stops miles out of the town. So it's easier to get the bus, but the bus takes about an hour and a half or so. But you get to this fantastic area where you have hanging houses over a gorge. Now, yeah, Omi Hachiman was visually impressive. This place even more so. And you take the bridge over this lovely gorge to look back at the town of Cuenca and admire its hanging houses, which look as though they're dropping off the edge of a cliff. And you go and do that from the Parador, which is a beautiful old historic hotel. So that's my top tip for day trips. But yeah, so much more in my book, Quiet Madrid, that you can buy via my website. Or you can go and look at Madrid Beyond the Guidebook to get a little teaser of that and join my mailing list. And the last word I wanted to say on this issue of overtourism is that don't feel that you're not welcome anywhere. Spaniards are very friendly people. They love to travel themselves. I got that impression in Japan as well. It's really where you have to tread carefully is these really, really overly touristy spots like Kiyomizu Temple in Kyoto or the Royal Palace in Madrid. But just show a lot of respect and courtesy towards people. If you really have to go early in the morning. And remember that overtourism is a highly localized issue. So that was one of the things that was really brought home to me when I was out in the countryside in Japan. There are other parallels with Japan and Spain in that both suffer from an aging population. And this aging population live out in the countryside in areas like little villages that are becoming increasingly deprived. And tourism to these areas is actually really, really appreciated. So I went to this town called Shingu on the very edge of the Kii Peninsula in Kansai. And I arrived and everybody said hello to me in that town. And then when I left, I got on the train and this lovely old lady in a big straw hat came and sat next to me. And we started having a conversation. And it turns out that she lives in like a little village. She was a farmer. Her husband died. And she started talking to the local tourism board, and they suggested that she started offering homestays to foreigners. And she says she's having the time of her life, like hosting families. And she'd just been to France because she met some people from Provence who came to stay with her, and they connected. And it really brought back this feeling that this is what travel is all about. It's about people making connections and really having a bit of curiosity about the place that they're staying in and enjoying these bridges between cultures. It doesn't have to be so stressful and commodified. Just as long as you go off that main tourist route, there's so much to discover and explore. Unfortunately, I can't drive, so it's hard for me to get to these places in Spain, but I do take public transport, and I do enjoy all the places that I recommend in my book. And yeah, I really recommend you do a little bit of exploring yourself and look into those little nooks or crannies that people don't go to, even in a very overly touristy city like Madrid or Kyoto. You can find wonderful places, and you can have wonderful experiences if you just go out of your way a little bit to connect with people. So that brings this episode to a close. I hope you've enjoyed it. As you can see, I'm not at home at the moment. I'm in London filming this, just coming to the end of summer. But I'll be back in Madrid soon, and hopefully I'll be able to bring you more videos from on the ground there. But for now, thank you so much for listening, or if you're on YouTube, for watching, and I hope to see you soon. All right, bye-bye.